Welcome back to Two Priests and Palestine. This second episode was recorded 3 months ago on March 10th. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Dr. Mazim Qumsiyeh.
Greetings, welcome to Two Priests and Palestine. This is a podcast of interviews and story sharing that sheds light on the current reality of Palestine. My name is Jeff Nowers, and with me as co-host is Jerlyn Henry. We are both priests in the Anglican Diocese of Toronto, Canada. In December 2025, Jerlyn and I were part of a 9-person delegation that made a solidarity pilgrimage to the West Bank. We went there to meet with Palestinians, to listen, learn, and bear witness so that after returning home, we might be more effective ambassadors of Palestinian liberation. We spent part of a day at the Palestine Museum of Natural History, which is affiliated with Bethlehem University, and it was there we met Dr. Mazim Qumsiyeh. Mazim is a biologist and a geneticist who taught for many years in the United States, but has now returned to Palestine. He's the founder and director of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability and the Palestine Museum of Natural History. And he teaches molecular biology at Bethlehem University. But Mazim's work extends beyond the world of academia. Wouldn't you say so, Jerlyn?
Absolutely. Mazim is a first-rate scientist. He's also a human rights and peace activist, deeply engaged in the struggle for liberation. Among his publications are 2 important books, Sharing the Land of Canaan, published in 2005, and Popular Resistance in Palestine, published in 2010. When we met with Mazim about 3 months ago, it was clear to us that his academic work in science and his human rights activism are bound together. Jeff and I are very grateful that Dr. Mazim is joining us from Bethlehem, and we look forward to this conversation about ecology and ecocide and genocide in Palestine and how these things are intertwined. Welcome, Mazim. Thank you for setting aside time to speak with us this day.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Let's jump right in. Today is the 11th day that Israel and the US has launched war in Iran. And those who are listening are wondering, how do we respond to this? They targeted and assassinated Ayatollah Khamenei, and Iran has retaliated with missile strikes throughout the region, including Tel Aviv. As we are speaking, the war continues to rage. How are things in Bethlehem? How safe are you?
Well, I mean, this is a very sad time in human history, and I think a pivotal time in human history. We are in the opening salvos of a world war. This is a regional war, and regional wars are, as we know from history, usually lead to world wars. In this case, obviously, there's Iran on one side that's being attacked illegally by the US and Israel, and the US under the basically command of Israel, because US foreign policy is now dictated in Tel Aviv, and the US military has become like, mercenaries for the Israeli army. But anyways, Britain and France are getting in on the game, if you want. In the Iranian side, we see Russia and China providing intelligence and other support. So far, not direct military support, but at least intelligence. There's Lebanon and Yemen on the Iranian side. There's Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, etc., on the US/Israeli side. So it is very, very worrying because it's also resulting in an ecocide of epic proportion. I don't know if people realize how much destruction of our environment is happening here, in our region. For example, Israel and the US bombed the oil depots in Iran, and they bombed oil refineries. And Iran in turn targeted at least 2 ships carrying oil in the Gulf, and that oil, of course, spilled. So we are witnessing an environmental catastrophe of huge proportion. Tehran already, the air is not breathable, and some people say Tehran as a capital city with a few million people may not be livable. The rain that came down brought particles that are very carcinogenic and really, really bad substances as a result of this war. And that's not counting, for example, the jet fuel that's from all these American and Israeli F-35 and F-15 and F-16s, F-22 jet engines that produce huge amounts of pollutants to our climate, greenhouse gases. Israel alone actually produced more greenhouse gases from jets than it produced from all other sources, and also produced more greenhouse gases from jets than the country of Spain produced in the same period of time from all sources like industries, kitchens, automobiles, etc. And we're talking about just the jet fuel burning. So it's an environmental catastrophe that's impacting the whole Earth. And if nuclear leaks also happen with attacks on nuclear sites in Iran, and if Iran attacks the Israeli Dimona nuclear site, which is even worse than the Iranian, because the Iranian nuclear sites are for limited enrichment, not for weapons grade uraniums and so forth. Israel, on the other hand, has a nuclear weapons program with some estimates between 200 to 250 nuclear weapons. If some of those material leak in the Nakab Desert, just south of me here, about 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers from where I am, we are all doomed. Already the pollution is beyond description. And that's not counting, of course, the economic impact. Already oil prices have shot up 30% and are slated to go up even to $200 a barrel. World economy is going to go into recession, and Europe especially will be impacted heavily, as will South Asia, like Korea and Japan, East Asia. Those are heavily dependent on oil, which is now not flowing from the Gulf region. So the situation overall is indeed extremely, extremely worrying and extremely dangerous. And those who track this danger, there's a group called the Atomic Clock Group. They say we are 85 seconds to midnight. We're getting close to that nuclear exchange.
You know, you've raised the issue of the ecological impacts of this war, and I want to ask you if you can take us back a little bit to your early life. How did you first become fascinated with the wonder of the natural world? Where does this ecological concern come from for you?
Well, as a child, 6, 7 years old, I had an uncle who was a zoologist who was studying to do his PhD at the time. And he would come back from his studies in Lebanon and then for his master, and in the US for his PhD. And he would take us children with him to the wilderness areas near my house. There wasn't a whole lot of houses at the time. I'm talking about the 1960s. So anyways, and I learned to love nature from him because he encouraged in me curiosity about nature and the wildlife. And I saw how beautiful Mother Earth is, how beautiful these animals and plants are, how complex this system, and how dependent on each other everything is. My mother also emphasized this because she liked to collect wild herbs and medicinal plants. We were not very rich, we were poor. So, we don't buy pharmacy medicines, we basically go to the field and collect certain herbs that are helpful for certain ailments. So this is how I learned to value nature and value animals and plants that are in this nature. And as I grew up and I wanted to follow in my uncle's footsteps, he died in a car accident when he was 27 years old, just after he finished his PhD. I committed to follow in his footsteps and become a biologist, become a nature conservationist, basically. This is how I got into this. And of course, living under Israeli occupation, and seeing the damage being done, like cutting trees, destroying, shooting tear gas canisters and other bombs at us, even increased my determination to work to protect this environment, to protect Earth. So from my childhood, basically, I've been involved.
Ecological wonder is one thing, but ecological resistance is perhaps something a little bit different. Was there an incident or maybe a story, somebody that you knew that crystallized for you that you would become a person of resistance in terms of ecology?
Well, I mean, I think, as children, we learn from our parents, not because they teach us something by words, but by example. When my mother, for example, took me as a child, with her to deliver clothes to refugees who were living in a cave near our house, and she did it repeatedly, that instilled in me the idea of caring as something very important. When my father was dragged out of the car when I was 10, 12 years old, uh, I think I was 12 years old, he was dragged out of the car and beaten
Hmm.
by Israeli soldiers because he refused to obey their orders to clean the street, as they put it. He was a teacher. He said, "I'm a teacher, I'm not a street cleaner." So they beat him up. Uh, but the dignity he kept, and maybe also because we were watching as children, he didn't want to show weakness or anything like that. But his resilience in front of us instilled in us as children the idea that you should not let evil do whatever it wants to do with your country or yourself or your bodies. Okay, they can beat us, they can hurt us, but eventually, we have control at least of our own minds. And if we have control of our minds, then they don't really have much to work with. We are free in our own minds.
That's beautiful and powerful. Thank you for sharing.
That is
I
powerful. Yes. Yeah.
This idea of resistance has been like in Palestinian blood, like thinking about like along the timeline, right? The effects of the Nakba. And for those who don't know, this is the great catastrophe, the great displacement of Palestinians and the expulsion of Palestinians in 1948. Palestinians have experienced ecocide, even as genocide is happening now in Gaza, has been happening for the past few years, even after the ceasefire. What are the connections between genocide and ecocide? To what extent is this land and its biodiversity suffering?
Well, I mean, this is something that, of course, being subjected to oppression, you develop curiosity to understand how it came about and where it came about. And I had an uncle who was living another uncle, not the one that died, or the biologist, another uncle who was an engineer, chemical engineer, who was living in the US. And when he came back to visit, he would bring us stories about cowboys and Indians in the US and the Native Americans and their struggles and so forth. And one of the things he explained to us is how the indigenous people in the United States were treated and what the colonizers did to the environment of the United States, how they destroyed the virgin forest, changed river courses, destroyed livelihood of the indigenous people of the US, the First Nations. This is something that also stuck in my mind, is the parallels between what we were facing and what other people have faced before. And once I became more a reading person in my high school, basically, I started to read books and other things. I started to understand that this is logical, that colonizers do both genocide and ecocide, as well as other sides, if you want, like scholasticide, destroying our schools and universities and educational
Yes.
system, medicide, destroying our hospitals, and so forth, or veriticide, destroying the truth, lying about what had happened and how it happened.
Hmm.
And things are interconnected. Why are they interconnected? Is your question is very simple. If I'm a colonizer coming to a country that's new, that's different to me, that has fauna and flora and people who look so strange, and something that is not connected to where I came from. Let's say, British in Australia. Well, what do you want to do? You want to recreate the landscape
Yeah.
to fit what you left behind, including the people and the nature. So you either quote unquote Christianize and the natives if you are charitable, or simply kill them or expel them. March of Tears in the U.S., Florida to Oklahoma, and so on. You do whatever it takes to reshape the landscape to fit what you left behind in Europe. Hence, we also recreate the naming of the land and the structures. And you can, in the U.S., for example, you have New England, New London, New York. It's a, as they call it, alt new world. You create a system that reminds you of your country. So, for example, the Europeans in Australia brought a lot of invasive species. They brought foxes that decimated because they like to have fox hunts, that decimated the wildlife in Australia. In the US, virgin forests were decimated and planted with things that looked like England, or in the case of South America and Portugal or Spain. So this is natural for them to try and to reshape the landscape with all components of the landscape. That is the fauna, the flora, and the people. And this is what happened also in Palestine. Palestine was multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society. 44 languages were spoken in Palestine before 1948, including Aramaic and Hebrew and Arabic and Spanish and other languages, Ethiopian, etc.
I did not know that. 44 languages.
44 languages,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea was to take this pluralistic society, multi-ethnic, multicultural, etc., and make it a monolithic society, make it a Jewish state with Jewish religion, Hebrew language, one culture, one monolithic Western European, Eastern European kind of modality of thinking and of operations. But that's not just for the people, but of course for nature. So, for example, the State of Israel, upon its founding, proceeded on a very large program to deforest Palestine of its indigenous trees, both wild trees and domestic trees. And they planted one kind of tree, which is pine tree. Why? To make it look European. Also, pine trees grow very fast and cover up the other trees, and their leaves are acidic. They don't allow much undergrowth and so on. Nothing against pine trees myself, but monoculture is not good. And it's not good for biological diversity. And also pine trees in a dry climate are flammable and they burn quickly. So we have all these forest fires in West Jerusalem and the Galilee, in these forests of pine trees only, not rich biological diversity. This is what they did. And this is logical in the context of a colonial mentality. Of course, from the indigenous perspective, this is destroying biological diversity and destroying human diversity. And so we are against it, and we insist on reclaiming a pluralistic society and a biological rich natural habitats. But this is, again, not different for colonialists in everywhere in South America. I mean, look at Brazil, you have people like Bolsonaro, Portuguese descendant of Portuguese colonists, who wanted to finish clearing the Amazon, basically, so that he can have cow farms for his rich buddies, and of course kill the indigenous people, remove them, ethnically cleanse them. It doesn't matter what happens to them. As they put it, they are, whether Zionist colonizers here or British colonizers in what became known as New England, or British in what became known as Australia, they all had the same idea. They considered the natives sort of like thorns in a field you want to plant. They are nuisance, they are obstacles, they have to be removed. They use even such language as uprooted, cleansing, nichsayon, they say in Hebrew, meaning cleansing the land, as if it's a dirty land, They called Africa the dark continent, the dark people, the savages, the barbarians, the people who don't know how to take care of the land, and we, the Europeans, bring this beauty, this technology, this knowledge, this whiteness, if you want,
Yeah.
and this is to them, this becomes the mantra for all their actions, and that's what they do.
Racism,
Again, logic.
racism is
Right.
embedded in all of this.
I'm sorry.
Racism is embedded in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, racism. What is racism? If you think about it, what is racism? Racism is the idea that you are better than those others, this group of others, the otherness, if you want. And the otherness always claims that, they're not fellow human beings, they're not equal to me, they are subhuman, or they are, as I said, nuisance or something. So you dehumanize them. As President of Israel said after October 7, 2023, he said, we're going to go to Gaza and kill as many as we can of people. And we will, and the defense minister then said that we will deny them, all Palestinians, 2.3 million in Gaza. We deny them water, electricity, fuel, food, medicines, anything that makes a life, because we are dealing with quote unquote human animals, not humans. Human animals. So that is racism. Racism is thinking that a population of others, the others, as you define them, are somehow less deserving than you are. This is racism.
Yep.
And of course, racism and colonialism are inseparable, because part of the same thing. Again, the British colonizers in Australia, they didn't want to create a society where Aborigines keep their culture and language and live equal to them. That wouldn't be logical. They want to transform the country. So to transform the country, the indigenous people of the country are, of course, going to be dehumanized, killed, genocided, ethnically cleansed, destroy their livelihood even. I mean, we have to remember the Europeans in North America killed 2 to 3 million buffaloes. Why did they kill the buffaloes? Environmental catastrophe, by the way. But why did they do that? They did it because it's food for those Apaches and the others. And we don't want those people, so that's their food. So deny them the food, and end of story. You solved the problem, so to speak. They consider it a problem. The people are a problem to them. The indigenous people are a problem.
It's really helpful to kind of remind ourselves that this issue of genocide that we're seeing right now happen clearly in Palestine is a history that we share. Like here in Canada, one of the ways we refer to ourselves who are not Indigenous is settler. And it's such a sanitized word. Like, yeah, I'm a settler here. But in truth, when we think like we are settlers, we have been willing participants in genocide of this nation and the people who call this home. So thank you for drawing that kind of connection, that this isn't a far off story. Could you share possibly a story of resistance, of Palestinian resistance to ecocide? Because we've seen nonviolent resistance, we've seen like stone throwing, but is there like a particular story that comes to your mind when it comes to Palestinians resisting ecocide?
Right. Well, I mean, Palestinians are no different than any other group of people, than Comanche or Apache or Aborigine in Australia or Zulus in South Africa, or any group of people who are subjected to the system of colonization. They will resist. This is natural that you resist. Why do you resist? Because obviously somebody coming to take your land and your water and your natural resources and remake your country to whatever vision they have of the new land that they want to build. So it's natural for people to resist these things. And how they resist, of course, different people resist differently. There are hundreds of forms of resistance. Armed resistance, by the way, is usually a tiny minority of the resistance. People don't realize this, but in every single colonial, anti-colonial struggle, the armed resistance part of it is always minuscule in terms of number of people engaged in it or the number of acts or anything like that. That's natural because not everybody, the common population is not going to go pick up arms, and find arms. How are they going to find them? Who's going to train them in arms, whatever. So do they have inclination to carry arms? People like me, I never shot a gun in my life. and I would never touch a gun in my life because that's my principles. I am not inclined to do that. But there are people, a tiny minority, who engage in armed resistance. That's also natural. But the vast majority of people, 98, 99, even 99.9% of the population, depending on the population, engage in what we call non-armed resistance. In the West, they call it non-violent resistance. We, the indigenous people, never use those terms, by the way, non-violent resistance. For example, Mahatma Gandhi, he was asked about non-violent resistance. He says, I don't use the term. They said, why don't you use the term? He said, because it's a negative term. We're not doing it against the violence. We're doing something proactive and positive. So he used terms like ahimsa and satyagraha, which are more positive terminologies about the actions. In our culture, in Arab Palestinian society, Christian, Muslim and Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-colonial movements, we call it in the Arabic language muqawama sha'biyya. The closest translation to muqawama sha'biyya is popular resistance. And I use that title in my book that you mentioned, Popular Resistance in Palestine. So why do we call it popular resistance or muqawama sha'biyya? Because it's the resistance that everybody can do. A woman, a child, an elderly, an adult, anybody can do it because it's very straightforward. What is it? There's an American author by the name of Gene Sharp, by the way. And, he wrote a book about popular resistance, about nonviolent resistance, as he called it. And he said there are 198 forms of nonviolent resistance. This is his terminology. And he listed them. They include things like protests, petition writing, boycott, etc. I don't know why 198, he couldn't come up with two more. But anyways, so I looked at his list and I compared it to what Palestinians have been using since the first Zionist colony was established in Palestine. And that was 1880, by the way. In 1880, the first Zionist colony with the idea of transforming Palestine to a Jewish state and kicking the Palestinian out was established in Palestine. Notice I used my terms very clearly. I said Jewish colony, Zionist colony. It is not Jewish presence. Jewish presence in Palestine, of course, goes back thousands of years. And we had Jews. My grandfather's best friend in school was Jewish under the Ottoman Empire. We did not have a problem with Jews. We do have a problem with colonizers who say, we don't like pluralistic society. We want to create a Jewish state with Jewish culture and Jewish everything and Hebrew language only and all of this stuff. Okay, fine. So when they come to do this, naturally, the local people rebel and they use resistance. They resist either by refusing to deal with them, by sanctioning, by boycotting, by protesting, by petitioning the Ottoman Empire at the time, later the British Empire, later the Jordanians or whoever. But they petition, they do all these things. So I counted that actually in the first 40 years of our resistance from that first colony, before a single bullet was fired in Palestine by the local people, before a single bullet was fired, between 1880 and 1920, we used Gene Sharp's 198 forms of what he calls nonviolent resistance, and we used another 40 of them that he had forgotten about. So we've tried all forms of resistance. By the way, if I'm drinking a cup of coffee here, or tea in this case, I am engaged in resistance. Why am I engaged in resistance? Because the Israelis don't want me to be drinking tea here. They want me to be out of this country or dead. A good Arab is a dead Arab. So drinking tea is a form of resistance. Whenever they question me, as Mazim, by the way, they never question me on the way out of Palestine.
Yeah.
They always question me on the way back to Palestine. On the way out, they say, bye-bye, have fun. But on the way back, they say, come here. And then they will spend 2 hours grilling me. Where do you go? What do you do? Why are you coming here? Why don't you go back and live in the United States or wherever? They will try to pressure you so that you don't come back. So essentially, everything we do here getting married, having children, whatever we do is a form of resistance, because planting a tree is a form of resistance. Harvesting a tree is a form of resistance, because the colonizers don't want you to be doing any of these things. In Australia, they prevented the Aborigine from practicing their normal hunting gathering experiences or planting plants. They said you cannot do that. They don't want you to do that. It doesn't make sense for them to want you to live your life and grow and multiply. No, they want you out.
Mazin,
Notice I used,
sorry to interrupt
sorry,
you.
but one last sentence. I use the logic, the analysis. As a scientist, I analyze. I don't say this is good, bad, or evil. I'm just describing reality. That's what colonization is. And now that we humans colonized every corner of this earth, by the way, but the word colonization is used specifically when people who lived in an area as First Nations are being replaced by new people. That's colonization, or subjugated by new people, because eventually all of us came from East Africa at some point. But humans spread around the planet, and there were mostly Europeans who thought it's a good idea to replace those indigenous people, Maori in New Zealand, with British, and have a British New Zealand. That's why it's called New Zealand. So it is, the original name is Aotearoa, by the way. And so that's par for the course. And now that we've destroyed planet Earth, people like Elon Musk are talking about colonizing Mars. I hope there's no living forms on Mars that we will be replacing. But anyways, that's what it is.
You know, when you were sorry to interrupt you there a minute ago, but when you were saying that drinking tea is resistance,
I'm
you
sorry.
said that drinking tea is resistance, and it made me think of something that Issa Amro. We talked to Issa Amro a couple of weeks ago, and he said
He's a
he said
friend
that
of mine.
existence is resistance, and I can hear echoes of what he was saying and what you're saying as well. You know, I wanted to ask you about if you could take us to the 1960s, and you lived through 1967, the Six-Day War. What do you remember about that time? And you know, how did life for you and for your family change? You know, from before 1967 to after.
Yeah, in 1967, I was 10 years old. I had just begun to understand a little bit of my surroundings. And I remember the Jordanian army leaving the West Bank before the Israeli army came. Actually, in our region, Bethlehem, Jordanian army left 24 hours before the Israeli army. They probably coordinated. There was no resistance to the Israeli army. Basically, they received orders to withdraw from the West Bank. So there was not any shooting in the Bethlehem region. There was not a single bullet that was fired that I can remember anything. I remember seeing Israeli tanks the next day after Jordanians left, Jordanian army left. I remember seeing Israeli tanks and jeeps rolling across the hills, coming towards my village of Beit Sahur, or the shepherd's field, where the shepherds heard the angel sing, went up to Bethlehem where Jesus was born. So anyways, they came in. People had put white signs on their houses. Some Palestinians were trying to leave before the Israeli army came. My mother was talking to neighbors and encouraging them to stay, telling them, if you leave now, you will not be allowed to go back, like happened in 1948, when people ran, including her uncle, who was in Jaffa, and he was loaded on boats and sent to Lebanon and lived the rest of his life in Lebanon. So she understood what it means to become a refugee and leave your country. Her own mother is from Nazareth, by the way, so I'm a quarter refugee, if you want, but my mother is half refugee because her mother is from Nazareth. But anyways, so what happened in 1967 is the Israelis came, There was no schooling. I went to a private school because private schools opened much quicker than government schools. Now you have a new government, the Israeli government, instead of the Jordanian government. So it took them a while 6 months to reopen schools. So for a few months, I went to a private school. That's the first and only time I went to a private school for a few months. Then went back to public schools under Israeli occupation. And then changes transpired after 1967, which is the increasing presence and interference of the Israeli military in our affairs. I mean, when the Jordanians were here, Jordanian army actually includes Palestinians. Jordan has annexed the West Bank and it was not a colonial system. The Jordanians didn't come to live here from Jordan. We lived our lives. We had what we need, and we continued to grow and prosper between 1948 and 1967 under the Jordanian rule. Between 1967 and the time I went to the US in 1979, when I was 22 years old, basically, in those equivalent period or years, we saw the Israeli system, colonial system now, not merely Jordanian occupation army or something, infiltrate every level of our lives, take over land, take over resources, preventing us from building factories, preventing us from agriculture, instituting laws that says you cannot collect water, even rainwater, you cannot have milking cows, all sorts of strange, weird regulations that the Israeli military put to advance colonialism, which started immediately after 1967. Actually, beginning of 1968, because they needed a few months to plan how to colonize the West Bank.
You know, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you've never picked up a gun. You've never fired a gun. Your principles, your own personal sense of integrity, the moral principles that you try to adhere to, prevent you from doing anything like that. You know, have there ever been moments in your life where, you know, anger or grief, you know, made you question whether a commitment to resistance without arms is enough?
You know, this might be strange to you, but I've never wavered. Even when an Israeli soldier knocked me down and then kneeled on me with his knee and cracked my rib, I did not feel hate to that person. I did not feel anger at him. Now, I feel anger at the system. I feel anger at Zionism. I feel hate for Zionism as an ideology, just like I hate Nazi ideology or racist ideologies. But I don't hate people. This is an important distinction. Why I don't hate people? First of all, what's the point of hating people? How is that going to help the situation if you hate the person? What does that mean? I mean, for me, I look at them not as, how should I describe it? I mean, I look at them like sick people, like somebody who's alcoholic. I had a cousin who was alcoholic and drug addict. I look at these Israeli Zionist racists, and I think of them just like I thought of this cousin. I feel sorry for him. I feel, and he eventually died from these addictions. We couldn't help him. I feel that he's destroying the people around him and destroying his life. I feel angry at what led him to these things and the systems and all of this stuff. But do I hate my cousin? Of course not. Do I hate the Israeli soldier who beat me? No, or beat my father also when I was 10 years old. No, I don't hate these people. I feel sorry for them. I feel they are mentally ill. They need psychotherapy, etc. But this does not mean, and this is an important point, does not mean I don't resist them. You know, Jesus turned the tables in the temple. Today he would be called an economic terrorist, you know, because he destroyed the livelihood of those people. They were making money. So, you know, so that's resistance. But Jesus said, love your enemies. He didn't say love the things they do to you or love the actions they do. So I hate Zionism, I hate colonialism, I hate occupation, I hate rampant capitalism and ecocide and environmental devastation. Uh, that is the philosophy of my life from my childhood that I learned from my parents. But also, I might, qualify by saying also that doesn't mean also I oppose people who engage in other forms of resistance. Desmond Tutu once stood in defense of people accused of terrorism in South Africa, ANC members. Desmond Tutu disagreed with their ideology, the ANC ideology. He disagreed vehemently with Nelson Mandela, who was a supporter of violence. He disagreed on the tactics and the tools and the ideas, but he defended those people. What does that mean? How do you reconcile that? Well, he defended them because it's logical. Again, if you have a variety of people, they're going to resist in a variety of methods. If you put a dog in a corner of a room and you poke him with a stick repeatedly or beat him up with a stick, a dog is going to resist. But there are different breeds of dogs. Some dogs will whimper, some dogs will cry, some dogs will try to bite your neck off, if it's a bulldog or something. So it differs from people to people, as it does for any group of animals, population of anything. It is natural also. Again, I use this terminology not in the sense of good, bad, or evil. As a scientist, I describe nature as this. A mosquito here was bothering me earlier today and drinking my blood. Do I hate a mosquito? I'm sorry, no, I don't hate a mosquito. I hate that it sting me and make me painful, but but a mosquito is a mosquito, and that's what it does, and that's how it lives, So it's natural for it to do that. A colonizer wants to come and colonize your country. They cannot colonize your country nicely. They cannot say, hey, would you please kindly move away from your house and land so that I can take it over and it will become mine and I can make it New England. If no colonizer would do that logically. They cannot do that and won't be successful anyway. They asked me to leave my house. Why would I leave my house? So I'm not going to do it nicely. So what are they going to do? The only tool they have is violence to commit against me and against somebody who's indigenous to the land. And if they try to commit violence, I have to react. I must react. It's natural to react. How I react, that differs based on my education, my religion, my culture, my background, my abilities sometimes, the tools I have at hand. If a thief comes into your house with a knife, if you reach this cup, you might throw it at him, or a brick, you might do it. For some people, they say, okay, take what you need, just leave me alone. That's also natural behavior of people.
Dr. Mazin, clearly you are a professor. Like the way you're talking, I feel like I'm a student listening to you speak. Can you tell us a little bit about your teaching, especially in the US? You taught in universities like Yale and Duke, but then you chose to come back to Palestine in 2008. Did you ever feel at home in the US? And like, how much did you long to return to Palestine?
Well, I went to the US to get my education and come back. This was my goal of going to the US. I've never intended to stay in the US. And I stayed far too long, actually. I should have come back earlier. But I felt also my presence in the US was useful for the Palestinian cause because, as I understood US society and the influence of the Zionist lobby in Washington and how they extorted people, and I'm talking about the 1980s, because as I said, I first went to the US in 1979. But anyways, in the 1980s, I started to understand how the US political system works and the importance of the Zionist lobby in Washington, how it determines foreign policy, how it bribes and extorts members of Congress and the president and judiciary and other people. I understood the value of work in the US towards human rights. And actually, you'd be surprised. The first action I did in the US that's political was not for Palestine. In 1980, I ran to be the president of the International Student Association at University of Connecticut in Stores, Yukon. And to my surprise, I won. The reason I ran to be president of the International Student Association, I thought that would be a good way to meet girls. I was not very involved politically. Anyways, the first day after I won these elections, this Nigerian guy comes to me and he says, "Congratulations, Mazin, you're now our president. What are you going to do about South Africa?" And I'm like, this 1980, remember? And I said, "What's wrong with South Africa?" This is how naive I was, age 23, 22 and a half. I was very naive about the world and what's going on. So, of course, he educated me about apartheid in South Africa and all of this. And we ended up inviting a speaker from London to speak about the struggle in South Africa to the University of Connecticut. So that was the first organizing action I took in the United States for something for freedom, not for Palestine, but for South Africa. And then we did some other functions like that. And then I got into work on Palestine, which accelerated after the uprising in 1987, 88 in Palestine, the uprising of the Stones, when Israeli soldiers were breaking the bones of Palestinian children. And when they killed one of my friends in 1988 and injured others, anyways, I became much more politically involved and I realized, hey, I actually can influence people, and that the American public is actually open-minded, ignorant of what's going on because they are brainwashed by Hollywood and the mass media at the time, you know, NBC and ABC and later CNN and all of this stuff. But they were brainwashed. But I noticed that it was easy to talk to them and give lectures and explain things to them, and especially sorry, I had to use this, but my family is Christian, so I'm Christian. So, you know, for them, hey, there's something called Palestinian Christians. At the time, it was total ignorance, 1980, 81, 82. They didn't know anything about Palestine. The vast majority of Americans were fed the bullshit by the Zionist movement about how tiny Israel is fending off Arab armies, you know, that's all. And those terrorists who are killing civilians for no obvious reason. You know, the usual colonial attitude. We're circling the wagons, we're defending ourselves. Those savages are attacking us. We don't know why they're attacking us. We don't even care to know why they're attacking us. Now, when the Americans, especially because the history of the United States, they can connect, they can understand the logic once it's explained to them, as I explained it to you earlier also. So I think I saw my power as an individual to affect a change. And this change that was happening around me and the importance of the United States encouraged me to stay a bit longer in the US than I wanted to. And we did a lot of good work in the US, but then in 2008, I said, enough is enough, go home. My mother was also getting elderly, and he'd take care of her.
So you came back to Palestine in 2008, and tell us, how did the Palestine Museum of Natural History come about?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, with my uncle, who was a zoologist, he had the collection, and I used to take care of his collection, and I used to even bring children, even when I was in high school, to see my uncle's collection and talk to them about nature and stuff like that, the way he talked to me about nature. So it was really not my idea, it was his idea that eventually there would be a museum of natural history. I was merely following his footsteps to establish something to promote environmental conservation and education about our nature, plants, animals, habitats, threats, and so on. And when I came back in 2008, I didn't rush to make it. I did collect specimens and publish papers on nature and biology in Palestine between 2008 and 2014. It took me those 6 years almost to do various other things, activism and so forth, including being arrested a dozen or more times in nonviolent, as you call it, or popular resistance. But anyways, but also doing research and teaching and all of this stuff. But I was also exploring where best to do it and how to do it. And I always like to plan things carefully. Where am I going to get the money? How am I going to operate? What's the volunteer situation? So this research period of 6 years led eventually to an agreement with Bethlehem University, where I donated $250,000 of my savings to Bethlehem University to start the museum. With
Wow.
my wife, we are full-time volunteers at the museum since then, since 2014. So 11 years we're full-time volunteers. I rarely teach, by the way, now. I'm not teaching this year at all. So all my time is volunteering, basically. And when I taught, was one course a year, that's it. So I had no income since 2008, basically, when I returned from the US, which was a big sacrifice economically because I was professor at Yale University and Duke University before that, and medical genetics is very lucrative in the US. I had
Absolutely.
six-figure income. My wife had six-figure income. As a certified public accountant, we gave up that good life economically. We came
Yeah.
back to Palestine 2008. That was the best decision I made, and my wife agrees in our life. It was amazing. And as I said, very timely. Could have been done a couple of years earlier, but it's still okay.
Wow, that's incredible. We often talk about how, like, in supports of big, large movements, that there must be a sacrifice. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, this was both a sacrifice, but one of the most rewarding choices that you've made to return. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So honestly, it was really
Thank
moving.
you.
Coming close to the end here, I wanted to just ask you, what are your hopes for the next, at least let's just say for the museum? What are your hopes for the next 5 years for the museum?
Well, we just have a new building now, and we're populating it with exhibits slowly because we don't have enough funding and enough volunteers to work with us. So my hope is that we'll get enough support, volunteers especially, to come here, help us, or they can volunteer remotely in things like graphics or design, interior design, things like that, to help us build this institution and develop programming of empowerment for our people and for visitors from abroad, international visitors. I hope this center also, which we are planning to have it, part of it as a think tank that puts out position papers, etc., that this center becomes, well, it already is, an oasis of hope in the middle of this mayhem here. It's an oasis of tranquility, an oasis of activism, because that's basically activism and work and planting, harvesting, garden work is the best psychotherapy for people and the best tool for us to move forward as a people, empowering our people and getting them to liberate their minds first and then their bodies. And this is my hope, is that we are a focus of a ripple effect that is happening already.
Excellent. Mazen, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing such deep wisdom that you have to offer. We have one question and then we'll kind of end for this day. If you have a simple message for the listeners who are in the West, what is that message?
A message to them is that we as human beings are both lucky and cursed to be living in these times that we are living in, with the development of technology of destruction, but also technology that could help humans, like communication, like I'm talking to you now across thousands of miles. So we have these technologies and the ability to influence people. I have an email list of 55,000 people. So a single individual can make a huge difference, can build a network, can do other communication. Every one of us is a valuable human being who can make a difference in their society, in their surrounding. Stand with the oppressed people. Don't let the greedy people keep dividing us and scaring us into fighting each other, but encourage building. Think of what you want. What's your ideal vision of the world? if that is my vision, which is pluralistic society with human diversity, biological diversity, where we protect planet Earth, then work for it. And no matter how little you think you have ability to do, you'll be surprised how much of an influence that little piece, like our piece here, has been a contributor. So everybody has ability to contribute, and collectively, of course, we make huge difference, huge.
Mazin, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You are an inspiration. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I want to wish you and your family and everyone there in Palestine. I want to wish them all the best. Keep safe, and blessings to you. And we'll talk with you again soon.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us on Two Priests and Palestine, Episode 2 with Dr. Mazim Qumsiyeh. You can find us on social media at Two Priests and Palestine, written out in all letters. And you can find Dr. Qumsiyeh at www.qumsiyeh.org. Our next episode will be live on Sunday, June 21st. Jeff and I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for being on this journey.